Good evening and welcome to the Forest Carbovision online stakeholder meeting. My name's Anna and I'm the chair of Green Skibbereen. So for those of you who don't know us already, Green Skibbereen is a not-for-profit CLG established in 2020, and it's dedicated to advancing environmental conservation, sustainability and climate action within the community of West Cork and beyond. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and empower individuals, businesses, and organizations to protect the environment, promote sustainable living, reduce carbon emissions, and build a resilient community for current and future generations. Green Skibbereen established CCAS, the Centre of Excellence for Climate Action and Sustainability, at my Russwood House in Lepp in 2021. So I'm just going to briefly introduce the team. So there's myself, I'm the project manager, Jose Ospina, who actually isn't here with us tonight, but he's our board liaison. Michelle Jonganellen is our stakeholder engagement coordinator. Mark Robbins is our environmental coordinator. And Sinead Everett, who is behind the scenes controlling all the technology, is our marketing and communications coordinator. So, next slide, please. So the reason we're here tonight is to talk about the Forest Carbovision project. This is an Interreg Northern Periphery and Arctic project. Oh, sorry. Could everybody make sure they've got their microphones muted, please? Sorry, I should have said that first. So this is an Interreg NPA project, and it's focused on Objective 2.2, which is promoting climate change adaptation and disaster risk prevention, resilience, and taking into account ecosystem-based approaches. The partners are the Natural Resources Institute of Finland, LUCA, Oulu University of Applied Sciences, the Agricultural University of Iceland, and ourselves, Green Skibbereen CLG. The project started in May 2025 and it will end in April 2028. And the total budget is €975,128. So I'm going to hand over now to our environmental coordinator, Mark, who's going to tell you a bit more about the project. Oh no, first of all, sorry, my apologies. First of all, this is going to be an interactive session. So we're going to be asking you all to participate in a number of different polls throughout the session. So each question will only give you about 30 seconds to answer it. So don't spend too long thinking about it. Just kind of answer the first thing that comes into your head. And if you have any other questions during the presentations, please type them in the chat and we'll answer them later. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes now to answer the first poll. Other. Okay, so Sinead, are we ready to move on or?
Sorry, there's just a couple people that just joined, so I'm going to give them a couple of seconds to look it over.
Thank you. Well, the other thing I meant to say is if you wouldn't mind changing your screen name so that we know if you're from a specific organization, that would be really helpful.
All right, over to you.
Okay, so maybe we can move on and people can carry on finishing it if they need to. So as I said before, I'm going to hand over to Mark now.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I just wanted to say, just to kind of open this, to give you a sense of the tone, the kind of style of this project, which is very much inquiring, posing questions, trying to understand how we might answer those questions, sketching out a roadmap, understanding the blockages along that roadmap, toolkits and all those kind of things to unlock this kind of idea of carbon farming in forestry and woodland situations. So stakeholders are really critical to this project, and this is the beginning of a kind of an exercise to, well, at the moment, to frame questions rather than trying to answer them. Yeah, so a very quick overview of the project. So this is about carbon capture in forest and woodland situations and exploring these things called co-benefits for biodiversity, water quality, and so on. And it's going to do there are three kind of strands, one of which is using drone technology to assess carbon accumulation in forest situations. And actually, there's plenty of opportunity for innovation around that too. I mean, when we get into the detail of these assessment tools, they're incredibly fine-tuned, and we may be able to pose all sorts of questions, maybe relating to the co-benefits around biodiversity, for instance, and so on. So that's the first strand, the assessment tools, which are drone-based. And then we will have pilot projects, which are here in the west of Ireland, but also in Iceland and in Finland, where we'll be using the tools and trying to understand how they have a kind of more hands-on applicability in those particular situations. And then, as I was saying, developing a framework, understanding the tools that will enable us to get to good practice when it comes to carbon farming in a forest situation. So we need to bring everybody together. We're at the beginning of a kind of, everybody's at the beginning of this journey, actually, right across Europe. I mean, there is some practice when it comes to non-forest habitats and non-forest land use. But for this one, we're at the beginning of a journey. Thank you. Next slide. So what we're going to do is to collaborate, try and bring people together in a series of exercises from the science end, policy-making people, local communities, people who own the forests, and those who are interested in carbon markets too. Build capacity to engage in carbon credit markets and understand what that means in a kind of sustainable forestry sense. Bring in this thing around digital innovation to really help us get fine-tuned decision-making and high-quality outcomes. And then critical to all this is how you do the accounting. How much carbon is accumulated? How do you prove that? How do you bring that into some carbon project? So accurate and transferable carbon accounting is really critical. Thank you. Next slide. So what's this thing, carbon farming, forest carbon farming? Well, at a simple level, it's to manage woodlands to enhance their ability to absorb and store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's the kind of starting point. But, let's set that in the context of a sustainable forestry approach where we really understand what we're doing, how we genuinely lock carbon into these situations and how we bring the other benefits that we might in this approach. Thank you. Next slide. Carbon credits, I mean, some of you would have kind of looked into this or know something about this, but on a terribly simple level, a carbon credit is an instrument that monetizes 1 ton of carbon or carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's 1 carbon credit. And these markets exist. Again, some of you may be involved or you may have kind of dug into them a bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in some of the slides coming up. Next slide, please. just a quick sense of the kind of technology and some of the kind of methodology. You'll hear a bit later that we're going to be demonstrating the technology on 3 sites here in West Cork. So drone-based, LiDAR, downward looking, but also sideways looking, well, one of the things they produce is some beautiful pictures, 3D pictures of forests, and we'll see 1 or 2 of those later. So there's a high-tech element in this project. Next slide, please. Then into this thing, carbon markets, and please don't try and read this, but it's simply here to say that there's 2 different forms of markets. On the left is the compliance or regulatory market. That's a kind of must-do for heavy industries in Europe in particular, but elsewhere in the globe. So that's a kind of, must-do, and that's iron and steel making, concrete, and all those kind of heavy industries. That's not the part of the marketplace that we're interested in this project, which is the voluntary carbon market. And we'll talk much more about that as we go through. Next slide, please. Just to kind of give a little bit of a sense of what a carbon project might look like in a forestry situation. So let's see, on the left, if you're a forest owner, you would be the landowner who might be trying to sell some carbon credits. And on the right would be the buyers. The buyers are the people who are trying to offset their carbon emissions. In the middle might be a carbon project developer, and some of you might be online. Some people tonight might be a carbon project developer. We've had some contact with people here in Ireland, but in other parts of Europe too, who are trying to bring these packages of activity together. And then you've got big questions around, well, by what standards do you bring these projects together? How do you understand them as high integrity projects? So there are standard bodies, and there's a few here in Ireland. Perhaps one that's better known in a kind of peatland situation is Peatland Finance Ireland. So there are standards bodies who provide the kind of definition of what's a high quality project in this situation. And then there'll be third parties like the auditors, contractors that do work on the ground and so on. So here's a kind of sketch of what a carbon project might look like. Next slide, please. So it's a deal. Well, let's see, we can see some kind of deal coming together, but like all deals, there's complications. And the first one is a really important one. This is the issue of additionality. So this is where we have to find additional benefits from doing the carbon project that go beyond the statutory requirements. So if you're taking money from the state to do forestry, then that comes with a set of rules and regulations. So we have to find additional benefits beyond that. And some of the best ways that's going to be able to do that are this opportunity around this terrible phrase, co-benefits. Co-benefits could be biodiversity or something to do with water quality, potentially around public access. And can we kind of find ways to bring values around those co-benefits that we can bring into this package in a carbon project? So 2 kind of layers of complication. Additionality, which is an absolute must-do, that we find ways to add in additional benefits, and then these opportunities around a series of so-called co-benefits. All right, thanks. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so well, interestingly, as I said right at the beginning, many of the member states across Europe are beginning to try and frame in a policy sense, but also in a practice sense, how these projects might work. And you'll just see in the second line there, a department minister here in Ireland saying just a month ago, as they launched their own consultation on a framework for carbon farming, that he is optimistic about the direction and potential of carbon farming in Ireland, but this is a relatively novel approach. If you haven't noticed that consultation, you might want to go online and you've got until the end of the month to respond to that. So that's the government beginning to frame the policy framework for these kind of projects here. We had our first stakeholder event a few weeks back in West Cork, and what we found were that most of the stakeholders were motivated by the climate benefits and the biodiversity benefits you might get out of these kind of projects. But honestly, this is reflecting where we are right at the beginning of this kind of process. A few knew some about the idea of carbon credits. Mostly people knew very little. They certainly saw at the end of the evening a lot of complexity and a lot of issues around knowledge and how we gain that and how we develop it and share it and so on. These issues around certification and transparency, around making sure that we get high quality projects in place with good impacts on the ground. And to get all that right, everybody's going to need real kind of policy clarity from the government. So those are the messages from our first stakeholder event. Thank you. Next slide. And just to say, here were some of the questions raised, but as I was saying right at the beginning, this whole project really is about raising questions. If we can answer them in the project, very good. If not, we'll try and point at the people who might answer the questions. So there's certainly this issue around additionality and making sure there's no double counting. Has to be avoided. You know, these projects will not work, and we'll get low quality outcomes if there's any risk around that. What does it mean for local people, these kind of projects? Who's going to benefit from these projects? Where does the knowledge and education come from? There's a huge task, I think, to take us from, you know, interesting idea into something that's got real kind of potential. And then if you're a forest owner, how do I earn the income? What, you know, how do I do this? How do I get that carbon project in place? Next slide, please. So our role as Green Skibbereen, the Irish partner in this kind of Northern European arc of partners, is to bring together that community engagement, make sure our communications are excellent. So as we go to each stage, that we're really kind of working hard to understand the issues and trying to communicate them. Hosting these things called living labs, which sound a bit kind of painful, but these are, if you've not come across them, are a kind of very nice way of working with people to flush out these questions, placing stakeholders right at the center of the work over the next couple of years and so on. So there'll be a series of these living labs exercises. Update, sharing knowledge, sharing questions, understanding what the blockages are, trying to point at where those blockages might be moved a bit over the coming years. And these pilot projects, be very nice to come and see this technology and begin to pose some of the questions that I think will be really fascinating around how we use them when it comes to innovation in forest management. Thank you. I think that was the last slide for me.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. That was great. So then our next poll is up on the screen now. So this one is about carbon credits and carbon farming. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes to answer that one. This is quite a long one, so I'll give you another minute.
Anna, did you mention the chat, the opportunity to put questions in the chat?
Yeah, so just a reminder that if anyone has a question, just pop it in the chat and we'll come to it when we get to our Q&A section. Okay, so hopefully you've had enough time to answer all the questions. Going to hand over to Michelle now, who's our stakeholder engagement coordinator, and she's going to talk a little bit more about stakeholders and demonstration sites.
Great, thank you very much. So for the stakeholders, you, over the course of this project, have the opportunity to co-develop the roadmap for forest carbon farming in Ireland and aim to address and potentially find solutions for the blockages to forest carbon farming and selling of credits. And because forest carbon farming is still emerging here, this is kind of a sweet spot or a unique opportunity for you to help shape how the framework will look like in practice. And yeah, so what's expected of you today, or what we're doing today, is that we ask you to reflect on these questions. And the goal is to identify a clear list of priority challenges, and this which will directly shape the topic of our next event. So from there, we will work step by step to address each blockage through the roadmap that we will co-design. And the roadmap will be stakeholder-led and actionable and built to support kind of real-world implementation of forest carbon farming. Next slide, please. So just in short, who our stakeholders can be and why they should get involved. So the stakeholders kind of that can link to the project are landowners, farmers, forestry professionals, environmental and community groups, policymakers, public sector, academic, researchers, students, NGOs, local communities, and technology and innovation stakeholders. And this is just a short list, but it can even expand beyond that. So the idea is that when we would have created the roadmap, each of these stakeholders kind of fill a different role, and so you could be part of that. So the goal is to have a voice in designing Ireland's future carbon farming landscape, skills development and training, access to world-leading science and technology, opportunities for collaboration and networking, transparency, evidence-based dialogue, and community involvement. Next slide, please. And for this project, we will have demonstration sites. So for the demonstration sites, we have selected 3 woodlands that differ in management approach, developmental stage, and dominant tree species. This diversity allows us to test and validate carbon measurement technology across different forest scenarios. So the carbon monitoring methodology has been developed by our Finnish project partners, who have established a very precise and non-invasive approach to measuring carbon above ground. And we will apply and adapt this methodology to Irish soils and forest conditions. So over a 3-year period, we will carry out carbon monitoring of each of the demonstration sites. And this will include drone-based LiDAR surveys to assess the above-ground biomass, forest structure, and carbon capture. And secondly, monitoring of ecological co-benefits, including selected biodiversity indicators and other relevant environmental parameters. Next slide, please. So the first site that we have selected is based in Ballyvourney. It's a 10-hectare site. The current structure is a 70% conifer, including Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and western red cedar. and 30% native species, including oak, birch, rowan, Scots pine, and hawthorn. And the age is its 5th growing season at the moment. The management is to be continuous cover forestry, and ownership is private. Then the next site is Myros Wood. This is a 4-hectare site. The current structure is that it's a Natura 2000 site, mixed woodland with fragments of semi-natural woodland. Approximately 50% of the woodland was windblown during Storm Ophelia in 2017, and it's a mature woodland. The management is that the area is now naturally regenerating with native pioneer species transitioning towards early stage broadleaf woodland, currently being managed for biodiversity and public immunity, and the ownership it's owned by a charitable trust. Next slide, please. And then the third and last site is Park Otaba. It's a 6-hectare site, and the current structure is it's a broadleaf woodland, and the planting had been carried out approximately 15 to 20 years ago, and it's managed for biodiversity, community engagement, and nature education. And the ownership is that it's owned by a charitable land trust. Next, please. Yeah, now we will go over to the next part of the workshop.
All right, we have another poll for you now. So this one's about if you're involved with a specific forest or woodland. It's just a few questions about that. We'll just have one more minute there for answering the questions. Okay, so there's obviously no substitute for a face-to-face meeting, but we wanted to make this session as accessible as possible to people who are, not based in West Cork, and that was partly in response to feedback we received from our first stakeholder session. So this is kind of the workshop part of the session. Obviously we've been asking for your input throughout with the polls that we've already done, but this is kind of more of supposed to feel more like a group discussion. So the first question we're going to ask is, when you think of carbon credits, what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind? So we're going to have another little window pop up in a second. There we go. Oh no, that's not the one. Do we have the other one? Or okay, we'll do this one first then. So how would you rank in terms of importance the following obstacles that may prevent you from adopting carbon farming? So the first one is policy, the second one is knowledge, the third one is practice. You'll have to scroll down to see some of them. Oops. Oh no. Actually, the best thing is to just maximize the window because otherwise it tends to get cut off on the sides. So just press the square in the menu that'll maximize it. So policy, knowledge, practice, baselines, additionality, co-benefits, financial and markets, standards, carbon project developers, and trust. And then after that, what word or short phrase comes to mind when you think of carbon credits? And we've got some jazzy music for you to listen to while you do it. And just to say, we will be sharing the results of the polls at the end, so you get to see what everybody said. So we'll just give maybe another minute for that one. Okay, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to answer those questions. We've just got one more poll now, which is just about looking ahead and next steps. So this is just about how you'd like to be involved in future, the rest of the project. Okay, So we just have one last section of the presentation, which Michelle is going to talk through. So over to you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. So what's next? First of all, thank you all for participating today and for sharing your insights and for answering all the poll questions. So now our next steps are that we move into the more exciting part. It's kind of building the roadmap together and getting a bit more hands-on. So what's coming next is that we will compile the barriers and blockages identified today and what you identified as the highest priority barrier, which is the one we would address first. This will be discussed and worked on in our next Living Lab session, where we will explore kind of solutions collaboratively. A Living Lab is basically a kind of real life environment where different stakeholders together can develop solutions in a more practical setting. So the next Living Lab session will be in person, and it will be on the 19th of December. There will be a registration link sent to your email addresses for this. The location will be at one of our demonstration sites at Myros Wood in Lep. And the agenda for today there will be a presentation and a demonstration of carbon measurement with the LiDAR drones, plus interactive discussions and engagement. So 2 experts from Finland will come over for the demonstration. And there are some extras. Lunch will be included, so it will also be a good opportunity to network and exchange ideas. And the session will give you kind of a first-hand look on how transparent carbon measurement will work and will help shape the next phases of the project. So I think maybe this is maybe a good time to have some room for some questions. If somebody has them, they can raise their hand and then turn on their mic, maybe.
Where's the icon for raising your hand?
That's okay. You can just go ahead. Who's speaking?
This is Liam Chambers.
Oh, hi, Liam.
I just asked Mark a question there. He already answered it, but there seems to be a weakening of carbon credit values, if you like, and I wondered if it was because of governments going to retreat on green policies and you know, as we had in Ireland, when you know that the Greens were being blamed for every damn thing under the sun, and that and obviously in the United States, the Trump administration has gone totally contrary to everything that was promoting carbon credits and carbon sequestration. And but Mark can give the same answer if he wishes that he already gave to me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not myself an expert in carbon credit markets, but the World Bank produces an annual trends report when it comes to carbon credits. And I had a quick look. It did indeed say there had been some softening in the markets, but I mean, interesting for this project, the places where prices were holding firmer were when it came to projects which had high integrity and high impact. And it really interesting were those with very clear co-benefits. I mean, some of you may have come across the low integrity, low impact kind of projects that have been exposed. So there's a kind of background that's quite controversial to carbon credits and their use in markets. So certainly there has been some very bad practice across the globe. We know for this thing to work, we have to find high impact and high integrity approaches. That means standards, that means transparency, and so on. So kind of interesting. You're right, I think, Liam, that the World Bank reports are kind of softening when it comes to price, but with a helpful focus on high impact, good quality projects, and particularly those with clear co-benefits.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask now?
I'd like to ask one if I may.
Yes, who's speaking?
Nicholas Sweeten, Irish Forest Owners.
Oh, fantastic. Hi.
The whole idea of a voluntary carbon market implies that there will be a buyer. who will buy carbon credits from a creator of carbon credits. What is the panel's view on the fact that most of the buyers will be polluters who are using the buying of carbon credits as greenwashing?
Yeah, I mean, I just good, absolutely central point, Nicholas. So you know, the two kind of components there, I think, in terms of an answer are, where's the standards that you're bringing into this project? And there was a slide there where we just pointed at standards bodies, and do they exist? Actually, you know, do we have a standards approach established in Ireland when it comes to forest situations? I don't think we do yet. So, and the government, I'm sure you would have noticed the government's consultation on the framework for carbon farming, but, you know, standards is one of the kind of central questions. So how do you avoid greenwash? Standards, high quality projects, well audited, quality outcomes. And the really nice thing about this project is with the new tech, the kind of high tech, I'm not a high tech person, but as I've seen it, the high tech gives incredibly detailed kind of data rich system, so that we can answer the question, what's happening in the forest, what impacts are there being achieved. So I'm with you, and I think this is kind of one of the big challenges, how to avoid greenwash, how to make sure that there's a genuine positive impact for the forest owner, but, you know, for the wider environment too, as well as the carbon question.
Could I?
It's a great question, and it's one we're going to have to come back to time and time again.
Yeah. Could I contribute a comment there also, please? This is Phil Walker from EcoMerit.
Please do.
We are working with a land use charity and in a very small way on carbon credits. We are not experts in forestry at all, or even carbon credits, but our main concern is exactly the point that the gentleman Nicholas there raised about the buyer, and are they just buying their way out of their obligations, and are we just promoting polluters? We have an agreement with our particular company that we're working with where they actually vet the buyer. To me, you should not be buying your way out of your obligations. Carbon credits are for use when you've done everything else that you can by reducing your footprint and so on. And then the other stuff that becomes more and more difficult and expensive to do, that's where you start using credits. So this company that we're dealing with, they actually have agreed to vet who they sell their credits to, and they want assurance and evidence that their buyers are actually doing that. And I think that's a great thing to do.
Very interesting. That sounds very sensible. Absolutely. Do we have any more? I'm also, I was going to say earlier, I'm aware that there are probably people on this meeting who know a lot more about carbon credits than we do. I mean, we're not claiming to be experts, and we're here to kind of find out and investigate more about the carbon credits system. So if anybody else who knows more about the topic would like to say anything at this point, you'd be more than welcome.
Can I have a question, please? Padraig O'Toma.
Hi, Padraig.
Hi. Just my concern, the three forests you've selected, well, of the three of them, I know two of them, and I'm familiar with the third as well, slightly. But I don't know, are they representative? If you're kind of building something that to take forward, are they anyway representative of, you know, the rest of the forest state in Ireland? I would, you know, the young forest is good. Why is it based on young forest only, or why is there not a kind of the mainstay block part of Irish forestry, the Sitka spruce woodland, whether thinned or unthinned or whatever? So that's basically my question, really. You know, is it representative? Does it need to be?
Good question, Mark.
A great question. I think we're not trying to find a representative sample of forest in Ireland, for sure. We're just trying to find some sites to test the methodology and bring people together. That's the simple kind of aiming when it comes to the sites we've chosen. There are other people who've got technology too, which are bringing to the market in other forest situations. And then just the last thing to add into this is that this is a kind of pan-European project, and for sure there's more, if you like, production forestry involved on the finished sites and so on. So we'll be gaining the benefits of working in those sites too. But I mean, the question of does the technology apply to each and every situation is a good question. I believe it does at this stage, but we'll have to see. And then there are other interesting questions around the technology about the cost. For instance, is this going to be a very expensive tool to use? I think the promise is it's not terribly expensive, but let's see.
Michelle, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think in general, what I still wanted to add is that also what's interesting about some of the sites that we've chosen is actually that it's challenging a bit the technology as well. There would also be some kind of innovation questions answered in the project, for example, about if it can detect epiphytes living in in the canopy, and if it can distinguish between that and the tree, because because the technology is kind of developed in Finland and kind of a bit more on the kind of production for a Sitka spruce site. We just seeing what we can do with the technology here, so there's some more innovation aspect to it as well.
Yeah, and I would also add that I think in the other demonstration sites in the other countries, they're actually pretty much all publicly owned forests that are being studied, and actually we have attempted to engage with government agencies that own forestry and woodland, and actually we haven't had a lot of uptake, I think it's fair to say. I don't know if Mark or Michelle want to add anything to that.
I just think that, I mean, it's an overused word, but this is such an emergent set of questions that, we're all kind of touching the fundamentals, which we hope to flush out over the next kind of year or so. So, have we got the right sites? Good question, Padraig. I don't know, but we've got some sites and we're going to use those to test the technology and have the conversations.
And hopefully along the way we will get a bit more engagement from government agencies as well.
Yeah, I just would have thought even I mean, if for selected, we could have selected a thinning site or somewhere down in West Cork. I could have selected something like that, given advice on that. But just the trust of the
Just to say,
whole.
Pedro, I think we're open. If you've got a site in mind, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. I can work on that for you, because I just do think it is, that to have some representative of. I know the same technology, and I saw the demonstration on the technology, and hugely impressed with it. But I'd like to see that applied to the kind of the general representative site, at least untinned or tinned in Ireland, and how and like there's baselines there from that that would be, I think, provide great information.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. I think Sakita's got her hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there were two things following on from Padraig's sort of thing about different woodlands. I was wondering what happens about like the NPWS run places like Kinnacoma up by Lochine, for example. Would that be kind of something to look at, or study or involve in carbon credits? That was one question. And the other thing was, how do you envisage the role of kind of environmental and community groups in this, bearing in mind that they probably wouldn't have any land at all?
Great questions. Who'd like to answer that?
Maybe I can answer the first question. Yeah, we've been in touch with the MPWS, and they were also invited to the meetings. But yeah, they just didn't. They're partly interested, and they're very welcome to join us and the coming sessions. But yeah, for now we just had to pick a few demonstration sites, and yeah, which is like it can still change, but like also we kind of have to think of like what our questions will be, or what the goal would be of the demonstration sites. And as Mark said, it's mostly to just have a site and try the technology and kind of see what we get from it on kind of different species and different ages. and different, innovative questions. This is, this is the first question, and then maybe somebody else can answer the second
Sure,
question.
I'd like, Sakito, I think it's good question. Thank you. So I think there's a number of ways in which, environmental interests can help. So this kind of questions around standards are really, really critical. We've already touched on that a couple of times. So, whose standards, who holds those to account? How do you understand them? That's kind of one version. Another version in trying to answer the question is, so those co-benefits that we talked about, how do we get this additionality via the co-benefits? What are the metrics when it comes to environmental co-benefits, when it comes to biodiversity and so on? So I think, hopefully we'll find there's some real kind of dialogue with the biodiversity interest groups, for instance, or we might work with, a natural capital accounting kind of approach. And if you come across these approaches, but and again, kind of environmental groups or environmental voices is going to be really important to make sure that those are quality conversations and that the standards work for those interests. So I think there's, it'd be great to have, if you want to, stick with this project, Sakita, it'd be great to have those kind of questions right the way through it. And if we don't answer them in the project, we're going to need to flush them out and be very upfront about them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. MT O'Donovan, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I would. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Tiger Donovan. Couple of basic questions. Is there, if you're looking to become involved in providing carbon credits, is there a minimum area of forest that practically you need to be bringing forwards? And is there a minimum timescale? What's the typical timescale on an arrangement for a carbon credit? And then just to complicate things, could you, I may have missed it at the beginning, in which case apologies, but could you give a few examples of co-benefits?
Yeah, I'll have a go. So how long would a carbon credit project in a forested situation need to be? Firstly, I don't think we have that practice at all yet in Ireland. So, we don't know the answer to that question. I know, as our friend from EcoMerit mentioned, that there are some projects, and there are some quite big projects when it comes to peatland situations, for instance. And so carbon credit projects there often have a 10-year kind of horizon, maybe sometimes slightly longer. I know one or two of those. I think when it comes to a forestry situation, we're going to be talking about a much longer horizon. So there's a good question about, how long do these projects last for? The other one you asked was, how big do they need to be? So I don't think there's a good answer to that, apart from if you saw the figure where I tried to just describe what a carbon credit project might look like. There's a kind of broker, a carbon project interest in the middle, the people who are going to put these things together, and they'll be saying, well, essentially, can I earn enough by putting these projects together to make the package work? So I've heard two answers to the question there, one of which is, well, we need biggish projects above 20, 30, 50 hectares. But I've also heard another answer, which is, well, could you bundle projects together in an area or of a type? So there may be other ways, and that would be perhaps a better response to the kind of Irish situation where, particularly in West Cork, which I know better, where we've got lots of small forest sites. Could you bundle them together in some way? So great. These are really good questions. Those are right at the center of the kind of nature of this exercise over the next couple of years to try and flush out how we answer them. And you had a third part, co-benefits. Well, co-benefits, I mean, classically would be about water quality outcomes. Is there something you do in your forest management which is useful when it comes to water quality outcomes? Biodiversity outcomes. And, how do we measure those? How do we understand them? What are the metrics? Those are the ones which are kind of being kind of looked at. And I know in the European Commission, there's work being done to try and create frameworks for those kind of co-benefits. What might the metrics be? And then other people talk about public access. That's a very kind of clear community offering a benefit. So we might find a whole series of other co-benefits too. But then the challenge is, well, how do you find metrics to measure those against the kind of baseline? You've done, started in one position, you've got a carbon project running, and how have you improved on that position? So again, part of this project over the next couple of years will be to try and do our best to phrase the questions, begin to answer them, work with others who might have better answers than us.
Okay.
Hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Tig. And we've got one more question, I think. Mary?
Thank you. That's to follow on from co-benefits. I suppose I'd like to offer, well, Law Pro would be, I suppose, involved with water quality as well. And Ellen Murphy would be our rep here in Cork. And she covers the whole county, though. And I know she's doing some work in West Cork already. So I suppose the other thing is, I think, to think about health benefits.
Yep.
And I mean, the HSE have like Woodlands for Health under Healthy Ireland is running nationwide. And that could be because there's a lot of funding that supports that, and it's not going to end for the foreseeable future. So that's one that could be run. And then the schools, like the curriculum for climate change is coming in our schools, in the secondary schools. So I think there's maybe an opportunity there as well, to work with students and maybe for citizen science as well. To be that in secondary school, be that with local community groups and training people up, and then having more awareness and also contributing to data, then live data, and being part of that. I think taking ownership as well of the space. This feeds into, I suppose, the longevity of the project into the future, and I think for future generations. So thank you. I suppose rather than a question, it was just an offering. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I mean, just for all of our sakes, the kind of challenge is that how do we find this additionality question? How do we describe a baseline situation, and then how do we describe the impact of doing the carbon project in terms of those co-benefits, and what are the metrics? Well, some of those might be quite well established. Some I think need to be developed. But yeah, thanks very much.
I've just noticed in the chat we've got actually got the Icelandic project partner, a member of the Icelandic project partner organization in the session with us. So I just wondered, Oliver, would you like to add anything to what's been said?
Hi everyone, Oliver, I'm part of this project. About the length of this carbon forest projects, we always have it. We have it like 50 years from the afforestation when the forest is planted, and then the forest has to be there for 50 years. That's the minimum in Iceland, and there's some of the areas are maybe up to 200 hectares, but they can be from around 30 hectares and more if you want to register it in this carbon market. Your afforestation or reforestation forest. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear. Obviously, you guys have been doing this for a long time, so we can learn a lot. Was there something else you wanted to add, Tig?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask Oliver whether the 50-year project might have something to do with differential growth rates between Iceland and Ireland, because down in West Cork and Kerry we have, I think, the fastest tree growth rate in Europe, which is partly due to our extreme rainfall and high ultraviolet and so on. And so we tend to go off the scale of other people's growth tables.
Yes.
It would be typical to harvest a spruce plantation in Ireland with, between 30 and 40 years.
Yeah, in Iceland we also use Sitka spruce. I know that in Ireland you harvest 40-year-old forest Sitka, and it goes to the sawmill. And it's like like a clear cut in most cases in Ireland, I think, still. And in Iceland, our Sitka is maybe 60 years, 70 years until, but then there are 2 thinnings at least, and then is clear cuts, but we haven't been doing any clear cuts. And at the moment, we mainly use like selective cutting in forest and thinnings. Yes, it probably should be a much shorter period in Ireland than in Iceland.
Yeah.
For carbon forestry.
Yeah, I would think from a forestry management point of view, we'd be having to think of a shorter timescale.
I agree.
Maybe 30 years.
Okay, thank you. We've just got one more message, one more question in the chat, which I think will have to be our last one. From Tabitha at the Nature Network Ireland. She says, will this project show better types of forestry for carbon sequestration? For example, I've heard that forestry managers or companies are still pushing for the Sitka spruce forestry, where farmers might be wanting to go more native.
Michelle?
Yeah, maybe I can answer this. Yeah, so I think that's something we can explore in this project as well, because the kind of standard forestry, how it now is, like, doesn't offer as much co-benefits as maybe alternative management strategies will, such as continuous cover forestry. Was, for example, one example how you can achieve additionality, where it makes it possible to even sell the carbon credits. So kind of, what we suspect is that other for forest management strategies will actually be more beneficial long term to gain carbon credits, but it's something that we'll explore. I hope that answered your question.
Could I comment on that, please?
Sure. Who's speaking?
Nicholas Sweetman again.
Oh, Nicholas, hi.
I'm assuming that you may or may not, of course, have looked at the Teagasc carbon measuring tool, which is on their website. And I think you will find that if you do look at it, that over a long period of time, the most efficient sequester of carbon is in fact conifer trees in multiple rotations. It completely outperforms broadleaves in terms of carbon sequestration alone. Now, obviously, there are different considerations to be taken in, such as biodiversity, etc. But in this country, our construction industry depends on conifers, and there's a huge storage of carbon in construction timber. So all of that has to be considered when you're talking about the various types of forestry that one should encourage in the country. And at the moment, one of the problems is the regulation, which requires 35% of any new plantation to be broadleaves, whereas most farmers will not want that, simply because they won't want to go into forestry for commercial reasons. And indeed, carbon is obviously an added incentive in terms of carbon credits if they ever do happen. But we shouldn't lose the sight of the fact that in the Irish situation, the most effective sequester of carbon is conifers and not broadleaves.
Thank you for that addition. I think obviously you're right. Like, if you would measure like which captures the most carbon the fastest, it would be the Sitka spruce. But I think, as you're saying as well, like, it depends. Maybe one of the other benefits can be what is done with that timber, after harvest, as well. As you say, if it's used for construction materials, that can be a thing to achieve like the additionality that we need. I think there are various options, and also just if you have Sitka spruce, but you wouldn't clear fell it, but you would do continuous cover, then it also keeps the carbon there, and otherwise, like, the carbon would be released again if you clear fell it. Is from what I understood.
Thank you. It's been brought to my attention that Shane had his hand up and we didn't ask him. So Shane, are you there? Do you want to give us give us your question.
Yeah, I'll come in there. Thanks very much, and thanks for the presentation this evening. My name is Shane Flanagan. I'm from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine and the Forestry section. So I just thought I'd add there to Tyke's query kind of, and look, it's not on existing forestry, but it's in relation to afforestation projects that will be happening under the European framework. So for anyone that doesn't know, the EU have out an EU regulation on carbon farming and carbon removals called this carbon removals and carbon farming, CRCF, and they have a draft methodology in place there in relation to afforestation. So activity area, so minimum size will be 0.5 hectare, and then activity period, so it has to be 30 years, but obviously that's going from greenfield site, monitoring all the way through. And I suppose in that as well, there's two things in terms of co-benefits. There's mandatory co-benefits, and that's in relation to the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So that includes things like soil health and prevention of soil degradation. But then there's voluntary co-benefits then, and they kind of relate to climate mitigation activities, climate adaptation, protection and restoration of biodiversity, pollution prevention. So there's an array of those, but there is mandatory and voluntary. And I suppose finally, maybe just to support Poric's input there on the sites, it would be very interesting to see from an Irish perspective a site that is maybe thinned, unthinned, that's sitka spruce, where there's forest management in place in terms of carbon benefits and for those co-benefits for biodiversity, or that. So maybe seeing something like CCF or whatever, transitioning management, seeing the benefit of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Shane. That was really interesting. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to have to bring the session to a close because we've gone over our hour now. But we do have one last request, which is that you complete a feedback form. So you can do this. It's going to pop up on the screen. You can do it right now. If you need to rush off for some reason, we can email you a link to complete it later. But we would really appreciate if you did complete it, because it will help us to plan the next session. And just to say thank you again to you all for joining us this evening and for your valuable contributions. And we hope that you'll continue to stay involved with the project and follow it as it develops. And we look forward to seeing you all again in the future.